I'm Anne Gaviola. Welcome to the Peak on Global, where we break down what's trending in the business world and what you need to know to stay ahead of the curve. Joining me now, as always, is Brett Chang from the Peak Podcast. Welcome, Brett.
Hey, Anne, great to be with you.
The big news this week is that Galen Weston is stepping down as the head of Loblaw, though he will remain chair of the company's board and the CEO of the parent company, George Weston Limited. He'll be replaced by Danish retail exec Per Bank, who takes over as president and CEO next year. What are your thoughts on this, Brett?
So when Galen took over as CEO of Loblaw, it wasn't intended to be a permanent position. He had always kind of been involved in the organization, as you can imagine, both in a president capacity, but also in management. And I think it's just a natural path that he's chosen to take a step back now. And it probably does have something to do with everything else that's going on externally with critiques around the grocery chain.
Yeah, and I mean, Weston has been in the headlines for all the wrong reasons lately, between the $40 chicken breast fiasco on social media, getting grilled in Parliament amid public outrage about soaring food inflation. I want to talk, though, about compensation. When you look at total compensation, Galen Weston's eclipses those of his grocery executive peers. He raked in nearly $12 million in total comp, that's annually, nearly double what the head of smaller rival grocer Metro gets, and more than the $8.7 million that the head of Empire, which owns Sobeys, gets. Now, to put all of that into perspective, Weston's total compensation is roughly 340 times what a frontline grocery worker is paid, 222 times what the average Canadian takes home. Brett, what do you think of this?
Well, I don't think it's good. The average take-home pay for a Canadian is around $60,000. And so this is obviously hugely more than that. And I think it really draws into perspective the issue of income inequality that we have in this country. We've got a certain percentage of people that are earning disproportionately, and so much disproportionately more than working people. And the other problem is that in many cases, they have a lot of power and influence over our politics, which is why this salary change just happened. It happened, and there's really nothing that we could do about it. And Galen Weston, and I think many other people in the same stratosphere of wealth, they find unique ways to defer taxes, to evade taxes, to do a bunch of different things, which only worsens the situation. And I think it's just unfair. It's just generally unfair that the average grocery worker makes so much less than the CEO, on top of what the CEO gets in all of their stock compensation as well. And that I think regulators, and we come back to this every week, it feels like, but I really do feel like regulators and politicians really need to take a look at this.
Yeah, and a lot of people, when they heard this news, probably the number one question they were asking is, but is it going to meaningfully bring down food prices? A variety of experts I've spoken to have said, no, not necessarily. So it's a big change at the top, but maybe not a bunch of changes towards the bottom where we'd like to see them. Let's talk about this next topic. I think it does segue pretty nicely into it. And it combines a bunch of themes that you and I have discussed at length here in recent weeks and months. We like to build on that kind of stuff. So the CEO of a Utah-based digital marketing and tech firm is in hot water. This has gone viral for comments he made during a virtual town hall last week. He said a bunch of things that didn't land well in the public sphere, including praising an employee for selling his dog, doing what he called, his part as the company does a 180. So initially they said you can work from home and that's fine, and people made arrangements. Now they're saying they're making demands that workers return to the office. Brett, my question to you is, aren't these leaders aware of how easy it is to record video calls?
Well, they should be by now, that's for sure. In fact, I think we've seen a couple of these videos come out just this past week that are under scrutiny now by the general public. And probably the best way to describe the comments made by that CEO are cowardly. And I was reading a New York Times article that profiled some of the actual employees of that company and what they thought about it. I think they had a really astute observation, which is that with the economy now in troubling times, and I think a lot of companies are seeing their revenues decrease, and they have to make some really tough decisions in terms of expenses and payroll and what they do. And some CEOs, I think this is probably a good instance of that, instead of actually making the really tough choice to conduct broad-based layoffs and cut their staff to save the company and to do the really hard things that need to happen to rein in costs, they're instead doing this weird kind of maneuver where they go out there and they say, we're making everybody come back into the office 5 days a week, and if you don't like it, well, you can quit. And then what they're hoping for is that many people do actually quit. And like I said, I think it's just cowardly. It puts people in a very uncomfortable and difficult situation. It doesn't create any goodwill. It's not pro-worker by any means. And in many cases, I think it is exploitative.
Yeah, you called it a weird maneuver. I second that wholeheartedly. Now, I'm not sure that, layoffs are the thing that people want instead. Maybe there's something in between. This CEO said several problematic things, including how nearly impossible it would be for a working mother to balance the demands of work and caring for her children. No mention of working dads. He also talked about quiet quitting, a whole bunch of things. This feels to me a little, though, like backlash against this whole notion of dedicating your whole life to work. And I know it is, different at a startup company where things are just getting off the ground. But generally, and I'm talking about across corporate Canada, corporate America, the way that this has been received is a bit kind of anti-hustle culture. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad way for the pendulum to be swinging at this moment in time. Your thoughts, Brett?
I think there are things in this world that are really hard to do and require a lot of work and energy applied to it in order to figure it out. Big problems like nuclear fusion, surgery obviously requires a lot of work just by the nature of the job itself. And then there's a lot of jobs that don't require that. And I think that's something that I've learned in my career, which is you can get a lot done between the hours of 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. You can be extremely productive. You can create tons of value and contribute in a real meaningful way. And you just don't need to work much outside of that. And if you have a high-performing team that's organized, that's focused, that's disciplined, you can get all of that done and also provide the flexibility to employees so that they can live their lives. I think I'll talk about the peak team for a second, but, you can come into the office. You don't have to come into the office. If you want to come into the office for a bit and you have to leave because you have to pick your kids up from somewhere, that's okay with me. And I think that if it works for us, I just don't see how it wouldn't work for many other organizations, especially those organizations that aren't doing that really hard stuff. Not that there's no value there, not that it's not meaningful, but we shouldn't treat it with the same gravity that we do the really, really challenging stuff in this world that we're trying to tackle. And so I think you're absolutely right that we need to have a much broader conversation about our relationship with work and finding a holistic balance between being productive and contributing value, but also at the same time having a life outside of work, and that should be encouraged. That will ultimately lead, by the way, to a more productive and healthier workforce, which I think we'll all benefit from.
Yeah, that sounds like a much more sustainable model. And remember, with this notion that, your work is your family, well, no, actually, the place that you are most replaceable is at work, but you are not replaceable at home within your family. So just a little something to take away. We got to leave it there. Thank you so much, as always, for your time and your insight, Brett.
Thanks, Anne.
And you can get all your daily business news with a Peak Daily podcast. It is available for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you find your favorite podcasts.